Alright, so going to our class page and looking at the current week's channel, you'll see what the work for today is. We're supposed to do page 2 of week 7 problems, questions 1 through 5, right? So we're finally starting a new page of the week 7 problems. We also have one Khan Academy class and one Khan Academy video to watch as well. So let's take a look at the page 2 examples, right? So to get an idea of what we're going to be doing today. So scrolling up, right, see the work for previous days. Right, let's remember to mark ourselves in attendance, get those extra credit points. We want to look at page 2 examples. Alright, so what we're doing here is we are doing a process called completing the square. The whole point of completing the square is that, you take it from looking like what we've been doing before, like x squared plus 5x plus 2, and you want to rewrite it in this special graphing form where it's in parentheses and it's x plus something squared, and then it's like plus or minus something else. Right, so these notes are actually pretty good, right? So the whole idea, right, is just like before, how we try to arrange our algebra tiles into a rectangle, right? This time we're just going to arrange them into a square, right? So you're going to put half of these x's going off the side, half of the x's going down the bottom, and then you fill in the ones, right? And you want to think about like, how many ones are you missing, right? What do you got to add here? So we'll show how this works in practice, right? So the problems say that complete the square to write each equation in graphing form, then state the vertex. Since we've never had any experience graphing these, I'm not going to make you guys state the vertex because it might be a little bit meaningless if you guys don't know how to graph, since we haven't gone over graphing quadratic equations before. Well, we have it, from tables and calculators. So let's move on. Alright, so we're going to do problems. I'm going to do problems 1, 2, and 4. Alright, so oops. My apologies here. Alright, so we have this function, right? This quadratic function, x squared plus 6x plus 7. So basically what we want to do, right? We want to focus on the x squared plus 6x. Right? We want to think, what should we be adding to make it a perfect square? And we just subtract that from the end. So remember that our perfect square trinomials are of the form a squared, right, plus or minus, right, 2ab plus b squared. Right? And for all of these equations that we're going to be doing today, our a is x, right? A squared is x squared, so a is just x. So now we want to figure out what b is, right? Because we want to be adding b squared. And since we're going to be like adding b squared, we're just throwing it in there out of thin air. we're going to subtract it at the end, right? So now it's like we're adding 0 because we're adding the same number and you subtract the same number, right? Like if you take 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back, you end up at the same spot. Okay, so right, we know that 2ab is equal to 6x, right? And we know that a is x. So 2xb is equal to 6x. So we just got to divide both sides by 2x on both sides. Great. So that way we get b, right? The x's cancel out, and then it's just going to be 6 divided by 2, which is 3. Okay, so that's cool. We found out what b is. But we also want to find out what b squared is, right? If b is 3, then b squared is 3 squared, right? 3 times 3 is 9. So what we're going to do here, right, is we add 9 and we subtract 9. Because now we know this part is going to be, right, we know it's in this form, right? So we know our a is x, our b is 3. So this is going to be x plus 3 squared. So let's just to be rigorous here, let me just add. Oops. All right, so we have our graphing form. My apologies. Oops. All right, so remember that our perfect squared trinomials, right, factor to be x plus, right, or whatever this is. If it's a minus, then it'll be minus b squared, right? So now we have our a is x, or b is 3, right? So this is just going to be, right, x plus 3 squared, and we got to combine these, right? 7 minus 9 gives us 7 minus 9 gives us -2. Right, so now we're in graphing form. So right now, if we wanted to graph this, I could say our vertex would be -3, -2, right? But since we don't have any experience graphing, that might sound a little bit meaningless. But it's also important to remember that these doing this to a quadratic equation will make it also easier to solve if you can't factor it, right? Because if this were a number, right, to solve this equation, all we would have to do is add 2 to both sides, then take the square root, then subtract 3. But moving on to problem 2. Right, we have our function, our quadratic function is x squared plus 4x plus 11. Right, so we want to add something and take something away. So now we got to think about what is that number that we want to add and then take away at the end. Right, and remember the order. You always want to add it, then subtract it. The reason why is because for perfect square trinomials, it's always plus b squared, right? It's never minus. So it'll always be adding, then subtracting at the end. So let's try and figure out what our b is, right? We know our a is x. So then 2ab, or 2xb, right, is going to be that term 4x. Right, so all we got to do is we got to divide by 2x on both sides. Make these guys cancel out. Right, the x cancels out the x, and then we're just left with 4 divided by 2. Right, 4 divided by 2 is 2. So now, right, if b is 2, right, 2 squared, b squared is 2 squared, which is 4. So we're going to add 4 and subtract 4. Right? The first three terms will always just be, right, a plus or minus, depending on whether this is plus or minus, b squared, right? So it'll be x, right, for a, plus 2 squared. Right, and then 11 minus 4 gives us 7. So we just add 7 at the end. Alright, so now if we wanted to graph this, we would know that our vertex, right, just to let you know, the vertex is, right, where our parabolas, remember the parabolas look like a U shape? Right? You could think of the vertex as like the very bottom of the U. Right? If you think of it more like a V or something, it would be the tip of the V. So our vertex is always going to be the opposite of this. And so the opposite of plus 2 is minus 2. And then this number is 7. So it'll be negative 2, comma 7 is our vertex. And we just draw our parabola starting there. But alright, I don't want you guys to focus too much on that because we've never done graphing quadratics before. And we only have 2 days on this lesson, and they just tell us to find the vertex without actually graphing. So now we're going to skip problem 3, so leave some space on your paper for problem 3. Right, so however much space these problems take up, you want to leave that much space for problem 3, and we're going to jump to problem 4. So the only annoying thing with doing these problems, right, notice that we were always dividing this middle number by 2, right? So like for the previous problems, it works really nice if this number is even. When this number before the x is odd, it gets just a little bit frustrating, right? Because now we want to think about, right, what is it that we want to add and then subtract. Also, we know our a is going to be x. So our 2ab, or 2xb, is going to equal 7x. Right, so we're going to divide both sides by 2x to make these guys cancel out. Ooh, why did that say 7x? We're dividing both sides by 2x to make, alright, these cancel out. Then the x cancels out the x, and we're left with 7 divided by 2, right? Half of 7 is 3.5, or 3.5. So now, right, if you get a decimal, then you square that decimal, you always get when you square it, right, b is 3.5, so b squared is 3.5 squared. And whenever you square a decimal, you always get a longer decimal. Right? So now it's 12.25. So we're going to add 12.25, then subtract 12.25. And then the first 3 terms are just going to be, right, our a plus our b squared. Right, so that's x, or a is x, or b is 3.5, so it'll be x plus 3.5 squared, and 2 minus 12.25 is negative 10.25. Right? So remember, do problems 3 and 5, and you were done.